Hello, welcome to Caffè Fibonacci. As you can see, today we're missing somebody. We're actually missing Tim. Tim is right here with us, though. He sent us a picture from some faraway location. I've prepared coffee for Tim, so it's just going to be like the normal Caffè Fibonacci show, only that it's just me talking. And today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite things inside of Illustrator CS3. And the first thing I want to talk to you about today, and let's move to Illustrator, is a panel that has been around for a very long time. It's called the Appearance panel, which is a really cool feature inside of Illustrator. But in my travels, I've noticed that many people don't even know it exists. So today, my attempt is going to be to show you how the Appearance panel actually works. On my artwork, we have a Chinese text, and it means Beijing, the capital of China. And what we're going to do with that is create some sort of a logo. So I'm going to color it, I'm going to add some strokes and fills to it. And I could do that just by cloning the elements and toying around with them. But today we're going to use the Appearance panel. Under Window, Appearance. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take it out here, and we're just going to have a quick look at it. I'm going to select the text. And what we see here is that we have a type element with some characters and default transparency. But what I can do with that Appearance panel is add fills and strokes. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually add a fill. In the menu out here, I'm going to add a new fill. And you see it stacks up neatly inside of that panel. I'm going to give it a color with the Swatches panel, maybe a yellow. And you see it actually applies the color without applying it on the characters. The next thing I want to do is apply some sort of an effect to that fill. I want this fill to come out of its boundaries. So to do that, I'm going to go in the Effects menu and choose a path effect. For example, the Offset Path. And look what's happening here. I can preview everything, and if I offset this text fill by 10 pixels, this is actually what happens. It bloats the image. I'm going to say OK. And as you can see, this effect gets added to that specific fill. Now, we're going to add a stroke to this. Add a new stroke. And it stacks up on top of that fill. We're going to make that stroke slightly thicker, maybe 3 points. Give it another color. And also apply an effect such as the offset path. Let's make that offset slightly less than the big one. Let's offset it by maybe 5 pixels, something like that. And what we notice now is that the paths actually overlap. And this is something that we would like to avoid. But if we remember well, we have a function inside of Illustrator that allows us to use the path finder to block out some of the strokes and keep shapes together. We can do the same thing in the Effects menu. So if I go under Effects and go to Pathfinder, we actually have all the Pathfinder options that we could find in the Pathfinder panel. And in this case, we just want to add all the shapes together to get this neat line around the object without any of the characters overlapping. And now, for last, maybe I'm going to add a new fill again and make that fill white, and maybe add an effect such as a, let's see if we can add a drop shadow. Drop shadow. Let's preview that and see how it looks. Okay, that's great. And basically what I've done is create fills and strokes that overlap each other, but the shape remains one. What is the benefit of that? Is that I can actually continue typing with that. Let's remove the Appearance panel just a second, and I can write 2008. And the same graphics that I've created in the Appearance panel will actually apply on the new text. What I can also do is create a graphic style with that. And if I go under the Window menu and open Graphic Styles, let's grab this panel out. And all I need to do is simply drag the text over into the Graphic Styles panel to save it. I can give it a name. If I double-click on it, I can name it, for example, Beijing Type Style. Okay, so that I'm able to find it easier the next time I need to use it. And the really cool thing about that is that any new text I now create, for example, let's write Florence, Italy. Italy. Make that much bigger. And maybe change the font to a Myriad Pro Black. Simply typing in there, black condensed, perfect. And now, simply by clicking on the graphic style and having the text selected, I can apply that to that text. So, using the appearance panel is a really neat way to apply graphic styles to any kind of vector object, and text for that matter. And it remains live text. The other thing that we can do is a thing that we can do with InDesign. Thank you, Tim, for that tip. In InDesign, we have a thing called mixed inks. A mixed ink is an ink composed with a spot color and a CMYK color, or two spot colors, or more. There is no way inside of Illustrator to create mixed inks. But by using the appearance panel, we can actually create mixed inks and apply them to specific objects. To do that, we're just going to create some spot colors in our Swatches panel here. Let's drag it out as well. And in the menu, we're just going to go Open Swatch Library. And let's take it out of Color Books. And let's take the Pantone Solid Coated. Out of here, we're going to choose maybe the Pantone 021, which is my favorite color, and just drag it into the Swatches panel, and then just randomly choose another color, such as this one, and drag it into the Swatches panel. So what we've actually done is add two spot colors into our Swatches panel. Next, I'm going to create a box, a little square like that, and apply my spot color to it, such as the orange. Let's get rid of the stroke around it. Now, thanks to the appearance panel, I can add another fill, new fill, which I'm going to color with the other spot color. And as you can see, these two colors now overlap. Then, simply I can go inside of the transparency window, transparency, change the transparency of the first color to something maybe like 50%, and this is what happens. Also, I can go in Window, Attributes, and apply an overprint. Let me zoom in here. An overprint for that specific fill. So let's select that and see what happened inside of our appearance panel. What we have now is a fill with a spot color in overprint with a 50% opacity, and over a fill with another spot color. So basically what we've created is, in effect, a mixed ink. And if we now save this as a graphic style, simply by dragging this object into the graphic styles panel here, we can apply that to any new element. So if I create a star in here, for example, a star like so, I can choose that graphic style and simply drag it on top of it. And now we have applied that mixed ink to this specific shape. Now that we've seen how we can also create a mixed ink with the appearance panel, I would like to come back to what we created before, this type effect here. And what I'm going to show in this next segment is that there is much integration now between Illustrator and Flash. So it's becoming very easy for designers to prepare designed files and hand them over to the Flash people so that they can actually code the animations or create whatever they need with our document. So to streamline that process, a lot of things have been added in Illustrator CS3 and in Flash CS3 Professional, which allows us this very seamless workflow between designers and Flash people. What we're going to do with this specific artwork is create something that will later be animated inside of Flash. So let's just go back to the normal workspace, the basic workspace, so that all my windows get cleaned. No need to close them all individually. I just need to go back to a normal workspace. Window, Workspace, Basic. And you see there's also other workspaces. You can actually save the workspaces. You can save the location of your windows so that every time you open Illustrator, you will find your windows and panels in the location that you're familiar with. Let's add some graphics to this text. Let's go back to Bridge, open this document here, and we have a tree with some birds flying around. So let's get this. Let's just copy this, copy, and paste it inside of our text document. zoom out a little. And with the selection tool, I'm just going to reduce the size of this and place it on my artboard, such as so. Now, one thing that is really important for preparing files for Flash is to work with layers in a very careful manner. And actually to also describe verbally, writing down exactly what the different layers are. So for example, if we go in the Layers panel here, I'm going to pull it out. We have a layer called Type, which with the text, but I'm going to add other layers now. For example, Background. Background. Okay, and then another layer called Birds, because I'm going to put the birds on a special layer. Okay. And now we can move the type on top of everything, just by moving the layers inside of the Layers panel. And then I'm going to select the tree and move it down to the background. And I'm going to zoom in here just to show you what you have to grab. This little square here, it has actually the color of the layer we're working with. So I just click on here and just drag it down to the background. And then I'm going to take the two birds and go back to the Layers panel and drag them over to the birds layer. And what I can do now is also move the birds above the type. So that what we have now is the birds layer, the type layer, and the background layer. Now, for those of you who use Flash, you know that to create a movie clip with a symbol, you need to press F8. So in Illustrator, what do you think the shortcut for that is? It's also F8. And if I press F8 in Illustrator now, it'll ask me, oh, you want to do a symbol. So give me all the information you need to give me about that symbol. I'm going to call it bird1. And actually, I'm going to do an underscore and MC, because it's a good way of working to also describe the things so that inside of the code you can immediately recognize the movie clips. So it's bird1 underscore movie clip, MC. Movie clip, I can also choose the Flash registration, and I can enable guides for 9-slice scaling, which I'm not going to do right now. I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to do the same with the second bird, F8. This is bird2. Bird2, movie clip. And what I've actually done is create symbols. Let me open the Symbols panel just a second. And as you can see, the two birds have become also symbols inside of Illustrator. But now, when I take that file, we're actually going to save it. But before I do that, I'm going to add some text, also to show you another really neat feature for opening Illustrator files inside of Flash. And that text can remain editable. So let's write something like Olympic Games. And let's make that text a little bit bigger. And we can put that on the type layer. Okay, let's save the document. Let's go back into Bridge and check that my document is actually here. Here it is, Beijing.Illustrator. I can see the preview inside of Bridge. And let's move over to Flash. Let me just open Flash and go under File, New. And Flash is actually going to ask me what type of Flash document I want to create. So in this case, I want to create a Flash file for ActionScript 3, the new ActionScript version. So let's say OK. And as you can see, my stage is the default size. My timeline is empty. I have nothing to work with. But under the File menu, I can now import to stage. I'm going to import elements to stage. So let's go choose that, go to the desktop in my Caffè Fibonacci folder, and take the Beijing.ai document. We can also see the preview here and import. The next window we're going to see is very important, because there we can actually see that the birds we've created movie clips with are here. And if we select one of these, we actually see that this is an instance, bird1.movieClip. Also, we have the type. And if I click on this type, Olympic Games, I can actually also choose to retain it as editable text. Or, if I really want the text to be the exact same in my Illustrator document, I can choose to vector outlines or to bitmap the text. But in this case, I want to leave it editable. Let's see about the other text here, the Chinese text. We can leave it as vector outlines. And then we have all the background elements and so forth. What I can do also from here is take an element, such as the Beijing text, this one for example, and create a movie clip directly from within the Import to Stage dialog box. I can convert the layers to flash layers or to keyframes. This is very useful for animators. Animators who use Illustrator usually animate their characters layer by layer. So I can ask while importing that each layer goes into one specific keyframe, or to put everything into a single flash layer. In this case, we want flash layers. We also want to set the stage to the same size as the Illustrator artboard, which is 800 by 600. How many times in the past did we have to check the original file, look at the dimensions, come back to Flash, create a new stage, redimension it? Now, we can simply say, just put the stage at the size of the artwork I'm importing. I can import unused symbols, and I can also import as a single bitmap image, if need be. So let's just say OK. And now what we can see is that on my stage, let's just see the whole stage here for a second, like so. What we see is that we have our layers up here, type, the background layer. We have our movie clips, bird 1, bird 2, and we also see that this text here, in effect, is editable. So what we're giving our Flash people is a fully changeable file, finally opening a very useful link between the designer and the coder. And now, I would like to pass the word over to Russell Viers, whom Tim and I have interviewed a couple of weeks ago about his favorite Illustrator CS3 tricks. So, Russell, you take the stage.
All right, here today at Caffè Fibonacci we have Russell Viers. Russell Viers is a traveler also. Where are you, Russell, today?
Today I'm in Gainesville, Florida.
Oh.
Tonight I expect to do a little alligator hunting.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we brought Russell in today to do a Illustrator tip. So we're very eager to see your tip, Russell.
Well, okay, thank you for having me, Rufus. It's always good to be on. The tip today is kind of basic, but it's a combination of a lot of things that I use on a daily basis when using Illustrator. And as a traveler, sometimes I'm flying at 35,000 feet and I've got hours in the airplane, and that's when I have time to create. So far this trip I've gone from Frankfurt to Edmonton, and now I'm here in Florida, so it's a lot of airplane time. When you're on the airplane, you don't always have access to resources besides what's on your hard drive. So what I'm going to show today is kind of a few tips that I do on a regular basis that use what I've got in front of me. In fact, this is a real job I had. I had somebody ask me to create a logo for a project, and so I started out with the Type tool and drew a box and went to the Glyphs palette. Love the Glyphs palette. Now, I don't need to choose the font from the Glyphs palette. What I actually want is a graphic, a dingbat. So I chose Webdings, and some of you have probably played with this at your desk before. And for this project, it's for a friend of mine who's doing some training, webcasting, which I'm also doing with him. And it's called Braincast. So I wanted to use a head, and I remember there was this head in Webdings. So I'm going to double-click on the glyph there, close out of the Glyphs palette, and you can see there's the head that I want to use. I'm just going to enlarge that a little bit. I'm using the keyboard shortcut Command-Shift and the period key, and there's the head. But I don't want it to be a font. I want it to be a graphic. So I'm going to go to Type, Create Outlines. When I do that, Illustrator converts that from a font into an outlined graphic. You can see it right there. You can see the handles and the lines. Well, I don't need these three things right here. So if you go up under Object Ungroup and you try to click on them, you'll notice they're still combined with that. And this happens a lot with glyphs. So what we really need to do here is Object, Compound Path, Release. And that's actually going to break this compound path into individual paths so that I can select those and get rid of them. I don't move this down. Well, I don't want the whole head. I only want the top of the head. And I'm a known slasher. I love cutting up art. So I'm going to rotate this, and I'm going to select a rectangle and use it as the mold to cut off the top of his head. And I'm going to go to my old friend, the Pathfinder, which I use, I think, on every project. I somehow end up over here in the Pathfinder. Well, if you look at the Pathfinder, there's lots of things. There's combining shapes, using the top shape as a cookie cutter, intersecting, and I'll let you play with this on your own. For this particular exercise, I'm going to select both shapes and push the second button there, which subtracts or basically uses the top shape as a cookie cutter for the bottom. And you can see that it looks like the top of his head is missing, but it's not really yet. It's still a live object, which allows me to select that white box and continue to play with it to get it exactly the way I want. So let's say that that's the way I want it. Now I'm going to select this graphic and now it really is chopped up. I'm going to go to the rectangle again, select the bottom of his neck because I don't want an angled neck for this. Select both, and this time, instead of clicking and then clicking expand, I'm going to hold my Option key down and just chop the bottom of his neck off. Good. Now I've got the head. So now I need to get some brains coming out of this for this Braincast logo. And I don't really want to use real brains. I don't want to be that gory. I want to kind of show just some radiance or some idea of a brain. So I'm going to go to my Polar Grid tool and draw. Okay? Now, as I'm drawing my polar grid, this is actually more what it looks like when you first use it. It looks like you're making a radar or a target. Well, I don't want that. I only want the lines coming out of his head. Oftentimes, you might do something like this. Draw a circle, holding the Shift key down, position it where you want it, and then make a duplicate and then scale it, and then you do it again and again. And that's all right, but that's a little bit too much work for me. So again, under the line tool, there's the line tool, there's this Polar Grid tool. So now watch as I draw, holding my Shift key down, and I'm going to hit my down arrow. You'll notice that I'm adding and reducing the number of circles in that. And if I do my left arrow or right arrow, I'm adding or subtracting the number. I want no lines, and I want 3 circles. Okay, and when I let go, there it is. Well, I don't have a stroke on that, so I'm going to go to my stroke palette. I'm going to give it like a 6-point stroke. That's starting to look pretty good. But it looks more like a rainbow coming out of his head, and that's not exactly what I want. So I'm going to cut this in half. I'm going to select Polar Grid, go to my Scissors tool, and I'm going to click, 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 or maybe I should say snip, snip, snip. And now what I've done is I've broken this into, when I ungroup it, I've broken this into, group one more time. Shouldn't have to do that. I guess I didn't cut it properly. Let's try again. I didn't cut it right. Let's make sure I got all these anchors cut. Yeah, I did that one. That one. It's going to keep warning me every time I try to cut on one that's already been cut. So let's do last one, or I'm on. So let's try one more time here. There we go. I just needed to ungroup it, and I hadn't done it enough. Since there were multiple paths, I had to ungroup it a few more times, and I'm just not a patient person. So now let me get rid of these lines down here by hitting delete. And now let's zoom in and look at these lines. Oops. Let's zoom in and look at these lines. All right, not bad, but I don't like the end caps being square like that. So I'm going to select them. I'm going to go over to my stroke panel, and right here I'm going to change the end cap to a round cap. And I kind of like that a little bit better. So let me zoom out a couple clicks so we can see this start to develop. I'm going to select these lines and group them again. Shrink them down just slightly, and let me move them down. Now, that's his brains. Cool. Well, now I've decided I want to put text on a path around that. Now, had I thought of that in advance, I could have made 4 lines in that polar grid, but I didn't, which is typical of me, always getting too far in a project and realizing you wish you had done it differently. So with my white arrow, or direct selection tool, I'm going to click on that line. Well, you'll notice that the white arrow, or the white points there, that I don't really have this selected. So I'm going to option click, and now you can see I've got all the blue, all the points are blue. That means I've got this selected. I'm going to copy, and I'm going to hit Command F for paste in front. I'm going to hold my Shift key down and enlarge this just slightly, and this is going to be where I put my type on a path. Under the Type tool, you'll see my Type on a Path tool. Not a bad idea when you're working with type on a path. Go to Window, Type, Character, and you'll notice that right now my type is going to be 338 points, and that's probably pretty big, and when I click on that path, it's going to get kind of ugly. So I'm going to just put this at 18 points, and now I'm going to click on that path and type Braincast. Well, that doesn't look good at all. That's because where I clicked, it's upside down and it's confused. All right, we can fix this. So Braincast is the type. The fact that it's the wrong font and positioned wrong is not a problem. I'm going to go back to my black arrow, and you'll see this line and this line, which makes the perimeter of the area where the type is going to be. If I grab that and drag it over here, you'll see that I've widened the perimeter to be the full width of the circle. I'll take this line and flip it to the outside, and I'm going to center my type. Still not very readable, though, as I'm still in WebDings. So let's choose a different font. If I choose a font from this menu in Illustrator, I only get the name of the font. But if I choose from here and then here, now I can click and scroll through and look at which one I want to use. So let's go down to Warning. There we go. Let's enlarge that a little bit. Maybe I'm holding down my Option key and my left arrow and bringing the letters together a little bit closer. And now we're starting to see the beginnings of this logo. Let me take you now to what the final logo looked like. And all of this was created without having access to the internet or clip art at 35,000 feet while eating my bag of peanuts.
Well, thanks, Russell. That's a really nice tip. And yeah, I mean, when you don't have access to the internet, it's a good usage to start looking for the fonts you have and maybe the symbols that are available inside of Illustrator. And
I always try to keep a lot of dingbat fonts on my computer. It's just a ready resource to have at your disposal anytime you want.
Good. Well, thanks, Russell. It was good to have you on the show, and we hope to have you soon again.
Well, we're back at Caffè Fibonacci, and to finish up this episode, I wanted to talk to you about a feature in Illustrator CS3 called Live Color. And to do that, I'm going to use a pixel image, bring it into Illustrator, use Live Trace, which has been around for a couple of versions now, and then start playing with colors using that new feature called Live Color. So let's go to Bridge, select my image, the lion image. I'm going to start dragging it over to Illustrator and just let it go here. As you've seen in another episode, it's also possible to launch a script from Bridge to ask Illustrator to do the live trace on an image selected inside of Bridge. But this time I'm going to do it slightly differently. Because in our control panel up here, we actually have a button, let me zoom in on here, called Live Trace. And we also have a menu from which we can choose the default of the trace. Basically, if we just click Live Trace, what will happen is that it will use the last option that has been used to create a live trace, which in this case is just black and white. But what happened is that Illustrator actually turned my pixel image into fully fledged vector art. But for the purpose of this exercise, I need an image that's about 5 colors. So let's go back on the control panel here and click on this button here that says Tracing Options dialog box. Let's open this window. And what we see from here is that I can make adjustments. For example, I can choose to have a color version of that lion. Or I can also choose the maximum colors that I want to use. In my case, I want to use 5 colors. And also, if we check the preview box here, we can actually see live what's happening on my image, such as so. Sometimes the vector images get really complex. A lot of vector Bezier lines and Bezier points. To avoid clutter of all these points, what we can do is just add a little blur to this image, just to make the image a little bit smoother. So let's choose 2 pixels, and the preview, as you can see, is now a little bit blurrier, but the vector art is much more simple. So let's trace this and let go. Perfect. Now we have a vector version of this lion. Let me just resize that a second and put it up here. And for the purpose of our exercise, I'm going to expand this image. And under the View menu, I'm going to hide the edges. And what I'm going to do is also clone this lion 4 times, because what I'm going to show you are 4 things that we can do using live color. Okay? There's many more things you can do, but we only have time for 4 today. So let's select the first lion. And up here in the control panel, you actually see a new button, which is called Recolor Artwork. And if we click on that button, what will happen is that the live color window opens and gives us access to an Edit panel and an Assign panel. The Edit panel lets you edit the colors you're working with. The Assign panel lets you assign specific colors to the artwork. But what we want to do in this first example is to actually edit the colors. And as you can see, all the colors that are present inside of my illustration are present also inside of that color wheel. Down here, also note that there's a little chain here that we can link or unlink. If they're unlinked, such as here, as soon as I move one of the colors, you see I can move it independently, and the color gets reapplied on the graphic. So let's just Command Z that, or let's just put it back to where it was. And if I link the colors together, they will move as one. So if I move the colors together, they will just stay in the same color values than they originally were. Also, what I can do is change the brightness of that image. For example, I can make the image much brighter, such as so. Maybe then I can also choose the darker color, for example here, and just move this one autonomously, and just recolor a portion of the artwork. So this is a way to get inspiration with color. But live color also allows you to experiment with color and to prepare color for production. So it's basically these 3 things we do with live color: inspiration, experimentation, and prepare stuff for production. Let's zoom out again. So this is our first test here. The other thing that we can do, and I'm going to click on that Recolor Artwork button again, is to choose color harmonies. Up here, you see that if we click here, that we have a whole list of color rules, harmony rules. And for example, we can choose to use complementary colors. Actually, let's just move out of here and move to the Edit window, see how that works. So let's open here and say complementary colors. And as you can see, the colors are now complementary on opposite sides of the color wheel. Or let's choose another one, maybe analogous. And all colors are in the same area of the color spectrum. Or one, which I really like, is the triad of colors. 1, 2, 3, on 3 different sides of the color spectrum. Or if we move down a little bit more, we see that we can also have compound colors, high contrast colors, or a pentagram of colors. So colors from exact opposite sides of the color spectrum. And we could assign that to that line, but as we can see, the result is not exactly what we wanted. And what we can also do in the Assign panel here, we can just change the color order randomly by clicking on that button. And as you can see, the colors move inside of my illustration until I get something that I like. Okay? So this button here, the randomly change color order, that's the button that I always show to the color challenged people. Okay? That people that don't have time to play with colors, you just press that button and color gets applied randomly. Obviously with the selection that we just made. Let's click OK and move to that other lion. Because there's another thing that we can use in Illustrator called Cooler. Cooler is a color community that lives on the web. It's cooler.adobe.com. Let me just show you the web page of Cooler. And what we can see here is that we have a website. Let me zoom on the URL. http://cooler.adobe.com. And here we actually have a community of color aficionados that create color, that upload their color schemes, that download color schemes that others made, and that can and discuss the color. You see, we have the possibility to rate colors. We have the possibility to comment about colors. And these colors then appear in this top 10 of the best rated colors. And then once I'm logged in, here I'm logged in, and you just need your Adobe ID to do that, I can actually download the color schemes as an Adobe Swatch Exchange file, .ase, and use that swatch file inside of Illustrator or InDesign or even Photoshop. So that's one way of accessing cooler information. The other way that we can do that is inside of Illustrator, under Window, Adobe Labs, we have a cooler panel, which allows me to see the exact same information. For example, these are the highest rated colors on Cooler. And in this case, I would like to use colors that are reminiscent of China. So what I can do from within Illustrator is interrogate the Cooler database, China, and go. And this will actually now go into the Cooler database and bring back the results. So we have China, Saxon Design China, Vintage Rose. The reason why, for example, Vintage Rose comes because the keywords of that color actually have the word China in them. So let's take this first color here, for example. And what we can do is simply click this button and add these colors to my swatches. Click here and check my swatches panel, which is right here. And if we go to the bottom of it, we can see that I have downloaded now the China color scheme from Cooler. Now let's use it in another way. We've been using Live Color by clicking on the button up here. But if I select a color scheme inside of my swatches panel, I can also click this button here, Edit or Apply Color Groups. Click, and boom, these new swatches that I've downloaded from Cooler are directly applied to my image. And again, under the Assign panel, I can go and change the color order randomly until I get what I want with the colors that I have downloaded. For example, something like that. And let's say OK. And let's save the swatches and go back here. So in the last example, I want to point out that Illustrator is now capable of reducing the amount of colors that are used inside of your artwork. In this illustration here, we have many different colors. And imagine that each of these colors is a Pantone color. So you would find yourself with a 5-color job plus the CMYK, something crazy. So the only way to actually print the artwork would be to reduce the number of colors. And this is something that had to be done manually in the past. Today, we can simply click the button again, and under the Assign panel here, we can use presets to recolor the artwork. For example, I can say I want to do a 1-color job with my favorite Pantone color. And Illustrator will ask me, what color library do you want to use? And I will say, use the Pantone Coated, solid coated, and say OK. And boom, in one click, the whole image has been recolored into one single Pantone color. Okay, this is it from Caffè Fibonacci today, from Rufus and Tim from the exotic location. Ciao, and see you next time.